Welcome back, everybody, to Headquarters, the only known radio show in America dedicated to that flop-top foursome, the Monkees. I'm Paris Stocktieres, along with John DeMeo, and our very special guest is perhaps one of the most talented and versatile performers in the entertainment industry today. We welcome to our program the one and only Mr. George Michael Dolenz, affectionately known to everyone as Micky Dolenz. Thanks a lot, Mickey, for taking some time out to speak to us.
Well, no, thank you. That's fantastic. A whole radio show dedicated to us, huh?
Yep.
That's fantastic.
Well, some people think we should be put in a straitjacket, but that's their opinion.
Hey, it's about time. I mean, somebody should have thought of the idea before us.
Yeah, I'll say.
Mickey, it's been over 30 years since you first appeared on television as Circus Boy. What was it like growing up in Hollywood back in the 50s, having your own TV series, and being the son of the famous character actor, George Michael Dolenz Sr.?
It was George Dolenz. He didn't have the Michael. But besides that, I didn't grow up in Hollywood. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. So I led a very rural lifestyle, shall we say. Born on a chicken ranch, and we moved into other houses in the valley. But I never really was into the Hollywood scene. Neither was my father. He didn't like that much, the Hollywood Beverly Hills scene. So I think that was probably a good idea. Because a lot of my contemporaries who did grow up in that scene have not been quite as fortunate as I in surviving that kind of lifestyle. So I had a very normal childhood in one sense, growing up in the valley, going to school. And then, of course, with Circus Boy happening, again, my father being in the business and being rather level-headed about it, my mom also having been in the business, it gave me a real good, solid foundation. I think that's one of the reasons my daughter, Amy, is doing quite well also, because she's had a good, solid foundation in the business. Rather than being tempted into the business by the fame and the glory and the fortune, I just fell into it by following in my father's footsteps. I never really ever had a burning desire. It just happened rather naturally, and I think, certainly in my case, I think that was quite fortunate.
For those who weren't born yet or haven't seen Circus Boy in over 30 years, could you briefly describe the premise of the show and your role on it?
I was just a little kid that had been adopted by a circus at the turn of the century. It's a good idea. Good, solid show. Noah Berry Jr. was in it, Robert Lowry. And that was it. A little kid adopted by a clown when his parents die. His parents were high wire act, Flying Falcons.
People who do other radio shows constantly ask the same question, like, how did you get the part of the drummer on the Monkees? Well, instead of wasting your time with that question, tell us, how did you get the part of Corky on Circus Boy?
Well, I went for an interview, the same way I got the part of the Monkees. An agent called up and said, you have an interview at 3 o'clock. And they gave me the address, and I showed up. It's as simple as that, or as difficult as that, I mean, depending on how you look at it. I was part of the business, part of the scene. My father's agent actually is the one who called us. I was only 10 years old, and we hadn't really made an active, hadn't really made an active move to get me into the business. But my father's agent had called every once in a while and said there's a part for a young kid, and would Mickey like to go up for it? And I almost didn't go to the interview. I remember I had a baseball game, and just at the last minute, my mom and I decided, oh, what the heck, so we jumped in the car. And I remember very well the drive down to the interview, and fortunately, it happened.
You sounded like the all-American kid, Mickey.
Well, I was a bit, I mean, I just was into, same thing everybody else was. And then it all happened. And after Circus Boy, my parents very wisely took me out of the business entirely. And I went back to school, normal, everyday school. And I think that was also very smart, because I didn't go through that period of adolescence, which is tough enough just for a normal kid. But I didn't go through it also trying to maintain a career and an image and a posture, which is, really a very difficult period to go through if you're in the business.
How did you feel about dyeing your hair blonde and changing your name from Dolenz to Braddock?
And didn't feel anything about it at all. It's very common in Hollywood to alter your image. It seemed all very natural, My father's hair, he had it dyed blacker for Count of Monte Cristo, and my mother. I mean, that's part of the fantasy. So I never really thought about it much. I didn't enjoy it a lot because it was pretty annoying, kind of.
How often would you have to dye your hair?
But
How often would you dye your hair? Like once a week?
well, no, only once about every month, once 6 weeks. They just do the roots. It wasn't dyed; it was bleached. Having it grow out, the roots growing out, I remember that was a bit embarrassing because I was back in public school.
Have you seen Circus Boy recently, and is it hard for you to believe that you were once that adorable little cute kid?
I don't remember. I mean, it's a long time ago, so I don't remember too much about it subjectively. I had a good time.
Was it tough learning to ride the elephant, and how many times did you fall off it?
I don't ever remember falling off, to be honest, ever. And as far as riding it, I mean, I'd ridden horses all my life, so I was used to riding animals. It's just like a big horse, I guess. I don't remember. I rode a lot of stranger animals than that. I rode lions, and I rode an ostrich, and pretty weird creatures.
After the show was canceled, did you feel at any time that you would be typecasted as forevermore the cute little kid Corky?
It was funny because after the show, as you said, was canceled, went off the air, they offered me another show, and my parents turned it down. They told me this, a few years later. But they didn't feel that I should continue in the business. They wanted me to go back to kind of normal life. And then about 4 years later, when I was like 16, 17, I got an agent again, and I started going back out on interviews. And it was very funny because I'd show up at an interview to show you how really kind of feeble Hollywood is at times. I'd show up at an interview, and there'd be a room full of 10-year-old kids with blonde hair, and I was like 17 years old with black hair. And somebody would say, "Who are you?" I said, "Oh, I'm Micky Braddock." And, "Well, aren't you 10 years old with blonde hair?" I said, "No," I said, "that was 7 years ago." People do grow up. So I remember that happening a couple of times.
Now, Micky, it's well known that in the mid-'60s you were in a band called the Missing Lynx, and at that time, were you just as interested in having a rock and roll career as you were as an acting career?
Probably even a little bit more, because that was the thing to do. And I started out in a group called the Spartans. I was kind of a backup singer. And then I went to another group called Micky and the One-Nighters. And then it turned into the Missing Lynx. And they fired me from the Missing Lynx 2 weeks before I had my interview for the Monkees. Because I was just singing. I was lead singer. And they said they couldn't afford to have a lead singer. They had to have somebody that also, played an instrument. I think it was really because the lead guitar player wanted to do the singing, too. And I was just doing lead singing and a little rhythm guitar at the time.
Micky, why did you use the pseudonym Michael Swain while you were a member of the Missing Lynx?
I never had that name. That was the name of the drummer in the group.
Oh, because...
It wasn't me.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
No, well, I can see how that could be confusing. No, Michael Swain was the drummer. I'd forgotten about him. He was the drummer in the Missing Lynx. It was a four-piece group, and I was the lead singer. And they decided they couldn't afford to have a lead singer. They didn't want to split up the money. The $80 a week we were making at the bowling alley. I was playing at a bowling alley in Torrance, California.
Is that right?
At the lounge of a bowling alley, singing Louie Louie, and walking the dog. Just a walking the dog. Everybody.
And who would have guessed that a couple of weeks later, look what happened.
I went for the interview a couple of weeks later, just after they fired me. I wasn't desperately brokenhearted about it. But I went to the interview, and, I'm still seeing the guys and kind of hanging out, and said, I went for this interview for a show called The Monkees. And, oh, wow, I showed them, didn't I?
Well, it seems in that way a lot of people have a misconception because all the books say that it was 2 actors and 2 singers, when in reality, you were in the music business in a way, so they really shouldn't put so much emphasis.
That is a misconception. It really is. I mean, I suppose my primary career was an actor, or had been up to that time. But by the time I had an interview with the Monkees, I'd already been in 3 groups. I'd played rhythm guitar in one, and lead sang, and backup singing in the others. And I'd already had 3 sessions at the time. One with Glenn Campbell playing guitar for me, and my session musician. And that was that "Don't Do It" record. I've heard around somewhere.
I was going to lead right into that, Mickey. How did you feel when you had your success in 1967, and a small indie label out in California released "Don't Do It" and "Huff Puff," 2 tunes done with the Missing Lynx?
Yeah, well, I thought it was quite funny. I mean, I didn't mind. But the other guys, I don't think, found it too amusing, and the studio certainly didn't.
And believe it or not,
Glenn Campbell was a guitar player on this.
Really? And "Don't Do It," I believe, actually charted pretty respectably in '67.
Yeah. It wasn't a bad song. It was a bit dirty, but...
We're back on Headquarters, the only radio program in America dedicated to the world's greatest make-believe band, the Monkees. I'm Paris Stocktieris, along with John DeMeo, and our very special guest again is perhaps the funniest monkey of them all, Mr. Micky Dolenz. John?
Now, about when you first got the deal with the Monkees, how come they chose you to be the drummer? I mean, you had some guitar playing experience. Why didn't they throw Davey on drumming chores?
What?
How come they didn't put Davey on drumming chores?
He's too short. You'd have never seen him.
Because you had some...
That's true. And also, of course, he was the cute little English, leading man heartthrob. So he had to be out there in front.
Was drumming the job that no one of the 4 Monkees volunteered for, and they sort of thrust in your lap?
Well, no. I mean, I don't recall even ever being too concerned about it, because I had approached the show as an actor. The auditions for the show were screen tests and the improvisation and acting. And there was music and singing and stuff. For my audition piece, I did Johnny B. Goode playing guitar. But I, knowing the business, I knew that the way the characters kind of fell in together, I mean, would be up to the producers. I really hadn't thought about it much or cared. They knew I could play guitar, but I think what happened was that Davey didn't play any instrument, really. And also, as I say, they wanted him up there in the front, front piece, showpiece. Mike had a lot of experience in bands playing guitar, and I suspect that he had probably lobbied quite heavily, obviously, to play guitar. Peter also is a very accomplished musician in a number of instruments. And so I think it kind of just happened by default. There wasn't anybody left, and I looked a bit like a drummer, and a bit crazy. And so there I was. I was cast as the drummer, and I said, fine, when do my lessons start? But I mean, in all respect, it's not brain surgery.
Well, Mickey, how was the feeling for you on that debut 1966 tour when you were drumming in front of like 15,000 people, and at the time you were still probably learning a lot of things about the tool?
Well, I was petrified. But by that time, I'd been playing for, nearly a year, I should think, and quite regularly. And the music, our music wasn't very complicated. Surely, certainly it was quite simple, especially in the rhythms. So I didn't have much trouble picking it up. The problem was having the time to rehearse, because we were so busy filming the television show and then recording that it was finding time to rehearse on the drums. But I lived with a practice pad in my lap for about a year, and it was terrifying. But I've recently heard some live recordings. Rhino released an old god-awful tape of a live concert that we did somewhere, and it sounds pretty grim, but the reproduction and everything. But it was pretty exciting. I mean, we were there, all just three-piece group, really, just pounding away.
And it's you playing the drums and the other 3 playing their own instruments.
Yeah, I was just the 4 of us, and Davey wasn't playing an instrument too frequently. Sometimes he went on to bass or he went on to the piano. But you see, my attitude at the time, and still is that I was essentially an actor playing the part of a drummer. And I played more drums in the Monkees than Sal Mineo did in the Gene Krupa story.
Now, Mickey, what were your first impressions when you first met Mike, Peter, and Davey?
Mike, I remember being very amused by his sense of humor. He had a very, 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 and still does have a very wry, witty, dry sense of humor. Peter, I remember being impressed with his musical abilities. That he could play the hell out of a banjo. I remember he really specializes on flailing banjo. And Davey and I got along real well. We really hit it off. I think probably because of the similarity in our careers being more theatrical. So our audition, we kind of stuck with each other during the the auditions and worked up some routines, some comedy and shtick routines. And but there was like another half dozen guys in those final auditions at least, and before that there was 40. I don't remember, too much about the auditions when there was like 40 people, but I remember when it got down to about 10 or 12, and a couple of the guys ended up working on the show as stand-ins and writing some songs. Bill Chadwick was one of the original finalists, as it were, in the show, and he ended up writing Zorn Zam and working on the show quite frequently.
Now, is it true that you actually poured a bottle of Coke on Don Kirshner's head? I've heard this story, but let's get to the bottom. Let's get to the truth. Is this true? Did you actually have the audacity to pour a bottle of Coke on Don Kirshner?
No, it was a cup. That is not true. It was not a bottle. It was a cup of Coke. And yes, I did.
Now, what did he do afterwards?
He took me out into the hallway, or rather, just met me out in the hallway after, and he said, Mickey, don't do that. I have to maintain some kind of respect. And I don't remember why. I think he was making some inane comment about the bass, or something like that. I forget what it was all about. It was really just being silly. It wasn't any antagonism intended. It was just kind of monkey shines, if you know what I mean.
Now, Mickey, it's well known how Peter Tork and Mike Nesmith felt about the sacking of Kirshner and that whole incident in early 1967. How did you feel about it? That's really not documented too much in books.
Sacking? Mm-hmm. What does that mean?
Well, when Kirshner got pushed out of the whole project.
Well, to be honest, I don't know much about it. I haven't read any of the books. I don't remember much about it at the time. I remember that Mike and Peter were very concerned about trying to control the music, and rightly so, and that was the main thrust of their interest. I was quite happy to be directed, being an actor, and I was quite happy with the music, and it was obviously doing quite well, and it was reaching the audience that it was supposed to reach. And to be honest, I don't know about the politics. I don't know who to believe. I mean, there's so many stories going on, all over the place. I know that Donnie Kirshner was around, a little bit at the time, but he wasn't. I didn't think at the time that he was like one of the major forces. I know he claims to have basically created the whole thing. I know that's not true because Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson were the producers of the show, and if anybody had, well, they obviously were the main thrust behind the creation, along with Gerald Gardner DiCaruso, the story editors, and Paul Mazursky and Larry Tucker, who wrote the pilot. Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart certainly had the strongest influence on the music. Originally much stronger than any of us, and indeed of Donnie Kirshner or anybody else in terms of the songs and the sound, as it were. And, sorry, just a second. Oh, I'm just signing an autograph here.
Thanks a lot, Mickey.
Jennifer? I'm live on a radio interview.
I like it. This is real natural. You don't get this many places. I like this.
An interesting story from Glenn A. Baker's book, Monkey Mania, documents an incident that took place at an NBC affiliates party in which havoc broke loose when you, Davey, Peter, and Mike appeared. Apparently, after seeing you guys firsthand, many of the affiliate stations decided not to pick up the series because they were offended by your long hair, among other things. Is this true?
No. You know more about it than I do. I don't even remember the party. Where was it?
Jason's restaurant?
Oh, yeah. Well, I couldn't tell you, guys, to be honest. I don't remember. I mean, I wasn't privy to that kind of information, at the time about... I wouldn't have known what a network affiliate was if you'd asked me. I mean, it was like we'd had two records in the top 10 when Tommy Boyce came up to me and says, "Hey, did you see you have 2 records in Billboard?" And I said, "What's Billboard?" I had no idea. I'd never seen a trade magazine in my life, I was just a kid. I was like 19 years old, just an actor.
Mickey, while the Monkees toured England in June of 1967, the Beatles threw a party in your honor. What was it like to meet the most famous rock and roll band of all time? Was it a big thrill for you?
Oh, absolutely, because I was a major fan. I still am. In fact, the only thing I listen to, really, whenever I do listen to music, which isn't that often, but whenever I do, I should say it's probably the Beatles, Glenn Miller, or classical music, in that order.
Now, Mickey, the first
major Beatle fan.
Mickey, the first song you wrote that was recorded by the Monkees was Randy Scousket. And at the time, the Monkees really weren't known for social commentary. Did you think in a way you were trying to change the image of the group with that song, or what was the reaction to it in America?
Well, no, I didn't write it for that reason. It was just a total, word association almost. And as you say, we weren't known for social comment, even though the first song we had, Last Train to Clarksville, was in its own little temperate way an anti-war song. It was about a soldier going off to Vietnam, though it wasn't obviously very heavy-handed. They wouldn't let us. Peter especially was always trying to get some social comment into the music and into the show, but NBC was very, very careful, and they censored usually any attempt we made. But Zornzam was, not Zornzam, Randy Scousket. It was really not an attempt to do anything. It was just a song I wrote after, in fact, it was the day after the Beatles threw us this party. And I was just sitting around the hotel writing. It's all very boring stuff, guys. I'm sorry, but
well,
it's interesting to the fans.
It doesn't quite live up to some of the
well, anytime we have Micky Dolenz on, anything he says is interesting.
What?
Anytime we have Micky on, it's got to be interesting.
Well, thank you very much.
Not boring. But anyway, I heard that you were primarily the reason why Jimi Hendrix accompanied you on the U.S. tour. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true.
When is the first time you saw him, and what did you think of him as an actual musician?
Well, first time I saw him was in New York, playing at the bitter end. He was lead guitar for some other group. I'm not sure who it was. I can't remember. Albert Hammond or something. John Hammond. And somebody said, you got to see this guy play guitar with his teeth. And I went down, and sure enough, there he was. And I was very impressed with him then, but I didn't remember exactly who it was until a few months later when we were at Monterey Pop Festival. And he showed up with the Experience with Noel and Mitch, and that was pretty impressive. And I said, just at the time, we just happened to be looking for an opening act for the tour, so I suggested it to Bob and Bert, and they said, good idea, and signed him up, believe it or not. That is pretty weird, isn't it?
Welcome back, everybody, to Headquarters. I'm Paris Stocktieres, along with John DeMeo, and our guest for the third consecutive week is the ever-popular funny man of the Monkees, Mr. Micky Dolenz. John, take it away.
Now, Micky, you were the first musician to use the Moog synthesizer on a rock and roll record on the fourth album with Daily, Nightly, and Star Collector. Did you get a chance to really learn the synth that well, and did you have aspirations to use it on more songs in the future?
Yes, I would have, I think, if we'd have kept recording. I did learn it. I learned that particular instrument fairly well, but the problem was it very quickly became obsolete. It was only monophonic, and it was very difficult to tune. It was a very crude, primitive instrument. It was, compared to what we have now, it was absolutely, archaic. It was like steam-powered. So it very quickly became obsolete. And in addition, like I say, we stopped recording as much as we had. So I certainly would have. And there was some of the recording I did after that. I used it quite a bit. I had a record out on MGM, didn't do anything, but called Easy on You, I think it was called, when the whole record was basically the Moog synthesizer. But after we stopped recording, I didn't keep going with it. Sold it to Bobby Sherman, actually.
Really? It's been written that you guys actually wanted to do a third season of the show in the vein of Laugh-In. Now, did you ever write a draft for that or a proposal for NBC?
No, we didn't. We just kind of gave our ideas, and the network didn't want to change the format.
What would your vision of the third season have been like?
Like Laugh-In.
Just like it?
Not that Laugh-In stole any ideas from us, because it never got that far. It was just an obvious kind of extension of the kind of humor and episodic kind of non sequitur humor that was going around at the time. So when I say like Laugh-In, it wouldn't have been another situation comedy. But I think that in retrospect, that was all a big mistake. We should have gone ahead and done another year, just like we had done the previous years.
And by the end of the beginning of 1968, the last Monkee season, not only were you singer and musician and actor, but you were also writer and director. You wrote the Monkees' last episode, The Frodis Caper.
Yeah.
Any fond memories of that?
Oh yeah, that was a major obviously a major boost for my career. Bob and Bert giving me the opportunity to direct and write. And that's kind of when I decided that's what I wanted to do. Took a few years to kind of get my career off the ground, but that was the beginning.
It must have been a real pleasant experience for you. Did that really catapult you yourself, as far as you were concerned, into the world of production? And was that really an inspiration for you to continue as a director and producer?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the thing that really solidified in my mind, what I wanted to do. Because at the time, I was getting a bit bored with acting. I'd been doing that for a long time. I mean, I'd already been an actor for 15 years at that time. So I was looking for other things to do and kind of deciding what I wanted to do with my life and my career.
Now, Mickey, what type of director would you describe yourself? Are you kind of an actor's type of director?
I suppose so, yeah.
And what are some qualities that you like to express yourself as a director? Meaning, are you avant-garde or more commercial?
I think it's mainly just, I think, as you say, an actor's director, and I kind of like to keep things spontaneous and improvisational whenever I can, but it's not too easy. There aren't too many venues for that kind of style these days. But I specialize, I suppose, in comedy, though I am starting to write some dramatic pieces now. I'm just finishing up. The reason I'm here in Hollywood, actually, is I'm writing a script for Warner Brothers. Yet another draft of a script I've been writing for about 2 years. Got very frustrated at one point until I discovered that the average movie takes 7 years from conception to production.
Mickey, I'm going to ask you a question a lot of fans have talked to me about. Now, is there any chance that any of the work you did in Britain and for BBC Productions will ever be released on video in America or shown on PBS?
Well, you never know. The studios own the material, of course, so I don't really have much control over it. There's a couple of shows that I created that I own the rights to that I'd like to get going over here, but mostly, all the stuff I did in England was television, and I'm not really doing too much television anymore. I'm focusing, as they say in Hollywood, focusing on features, motion pictures. So I don't really know what the plans are for the shows. Most of the stuff was fairly British and esoteric, fairly ethnic. I mean, it was not stuff that I think would travel real well.
Was it a tough transition for you leaving the acting field and going to directing? Because after the Monkees show went off the air, everybody typecast you as a drummer.
Oh, you mean at that point?
Yeah, at that point.
That was very difficult. That took a few years. Fortunately, I'd been through it before, after Circus Boy, the downtime. So it didn't really bother me as much as, it might have bothered other people. I guess I kind of expected it. And took a couple of years to of course, for, a while, I was just like retired. I just sat back and kicked back and partied. But then it took a couple of years. My career really didn't take off till I went to England.
Now, it surprises a lot of fans, Mickey, that since you were the voice of the Monkees, you never put out a solo album. Is there any reason you didn't?
No, I guess just got interested in other things, directing and producing and writing, I suppose. That's the only reason. I'd do one if anybody offers. I'd do one.
Before we let you go, Mickey, what are the future plans of the Monkees?
I'm glad you asked, because we have quite a few. We're leaving on tour next week for Australia for a month, and then I'm coming back here to Hollywood to work on a Monkee movie. And in addition, we're going to go out on the road, I think, next summer with a new album, with any luck. So there's quite a few moves afoot.